Okay, so before we learn about the discovery of chromosomes within the nucleus, first let's get an understanding of the basic cell cycle in an animal or plant. This diagram can capture what is true of most cells in a multicelled creature. We can think of the important event in a cell's life is when it is metaphorically born, when it is created. Here we see a cell as part of an animal body, and this cell is going to reproduce to create two new cells from one. That process has come to be called mitosis, and it generates two what we'll call daughter cells. These cells then go on to perform whatever function they have in the animal. Animals are made of many different kinds of cells, each performing different functions, and we'll try to figure out how that happens in a later unit. But let's take a look at this cell here. It has been born from a single parent cell. It has a sibling as well. But this cell is going to go on to do its normal jobs in the animal's body. It'll burn sugar. That's what we mean by metabolism. It'll grow a little bit. It'll get a little bigger. It'll be repairing damage along the way, and it will be performing some specialized function within the body. It might be a white blood cell, could be a brain cell, or a liver cell, or a skin cell, or whatever. Now, when the cell is just doing its normal day-to-day activities, we're going to call that stage of its life interphase. Interphase is in contrast with that stage of its life where it itself might go through the reproduction process, mitosis. And we can see here the way this is constructed. If we think of the entire one trip around the circle here as the cycle, mitosis is a small fraction of that cycle. Most of the time of a cell is spent in interphase. Now, in addition to just doing day-to-day activities, a very important thing happens during interphase. That is, the cell, if it's going to go on to reproduce, it will have to prepare for division. And we'll see that that involves also duplicating its chromosomes in the nucleus. In fact, when it gets to mitosis, that process of mitosis has a lot to do with these chromosomes being separated out into each of these daughter cells. So again, the cell cycle defines sort of the basic life cycle of a cell. A cell has a birth when it originated from a parent cell. The cell goes through its day-to-day activities. Some cells, of course, will die or get damaged or whatnot, but if the cell is destined to go on to reproduce, then that sort of completes its life cycle. It will become a parent to two daughter cells as it goes through the process of mitosis. We can see the process of mitosis on this diagram as well. Here we have the fertilized egg. So sperm met egg, and now we have the beginnings of a new offspring. The first thing that happens then is this one-celled fertilized egg is going to go through this process of the cell cycle and end up producing two cells, two daughter cells, in the process of mitosis. Now, in this diagram, the two daughter cells are shown separately here, but in reality, they would be stuck together, forming a two-cell embryo. But we're showing it in this way to sort of illustrate the idea of descendants, that this parent cell is going to have two descendants, and each of these cells will have two descendants, and each of those cells will have two descendants, and so on. But again, in reality, this early stage of development, all of these cells would be stuck together, forming the embryo. So at some point, we have a fertilized egg. A little later, we have a 2-cell embryo and a 4-cell embryo and an 8-cell and so on. Mitosis, then, is the process where the parent cell is going to split into two daughter cells. Interphase is then that stage of the life cycle where the cell is doing its normal activities, metabolizing, growing, repairing itself, and preparing for the next round of mitosis if it's called for. Now, let's imagine these cells are a population of cells that would be specialized cells in the skin. And here we have skin cells that would be the actual surface of your skin. Let's say you get a cut on your skin, so we've got some injured cells here. One of the consequences of the injury is that chemicals are released from the injured cells that stimulate nearby skin cells to start dividing, to go through the mitosis process. And that's how a wound is repaired. These damaged cells will be replaced by neighboring cells that are triggered to go through mitosis. Now, this process raises a question, well, how do these neighboring cells know to stop dividing? So it turns out that cells are in constant communication with their near neighbors. They release chemicals that influence the behavior of their neighbors. And so as cells reproduce to repair the wound, at a certain point, nearby cells will signal, okay, stop dividing, the wound has been healed. So we want to think about cells in the animal body as being very social. They are in constant communication. They are signaling each other with molecules that carry certain messages. Some molecules carry the message of stop dividing, as when the wound is already healed. Sometimes the message might be start dividing, as when the injured cells here, the chemicals they release will trigger neighboring cells to start dividing. So chemical signals can regulate then cell behavior. Those chemicals are produced by nearby cells. Now let's consider an unfortunate situation where one of the skin cells, or cell that will, destined to become a skin cell here, has received some damage from ultraviolet light. So let's say this person is out on the beach and they're getting a suntan, right? Well, prolonged exposure to the sun means your skin cells are absorbing a lot of ultraviolet light. It turns out that ultraviolet light can damage chromosomes within the cell nucleus. And when enough damage accumulates in the chromosomes of a cell, what can happen is the cell becomes deaf to the chemical signaling from nearby cells. And these damaged cells may begin to go through the cell cycle repeatedly, keep on going around and around the cell cycle, going through mitosis. In other words, they will start to reproduce uncontrollably. They no longer listen to the stop signals from nearby cells. And if that happens, what you end up with is a tumor, right? So some of these skin cells now, because of the damage suffered by UV light, some of these skin cells start to divide uncontrollably, and they form a mass of cells that we call a tumor. So this is what cancer is. So cancer is due to mutations, changes, chromosome damage that dysregulates cells. They become rebels, in a sense. Normal cells listen to their neighbors. They respond to chemical signals. Cancer cells no longer are responsive to the signals from neighboring cells, and they continue to divide uncontrollably, forming a tumor. Unfortunately, some of these tumor cells can break off from the main tumor, travel in the blood supply, and then locate themselves in another part of the body. That's called metastasis. So a tumor that originally is formed on the skin, for example, some of the cancer cells can break away and travel to other parts of the body where new tumors can emerge. So cancer then is a disease of cell reproduction, you might say. These tumor cells are rebels. Cancer cells are rebel cells. In a sense, they no longer are cooperating. So whereas cells cooperate by not dividing out of control, cells cooperate by doing different functions and so on, cancer cells are no longer cooperating with the rest of the society of cells that we call the animal. They are rebel cells. They selfishly reproduce at the expense of the rest of the organism.